the best advice that you can give to an author is to write about what you know, then the best advice you can give to somebody who's going to do a Ignite talk is talk about something you love. And I genuinely love transformational geometry. I'm actually really excited about how much of it shows up in the Common Core. No, I'm not expecting you to read that. But I'm excited because there's so many things we can do in transformational geometry that we can't do in axiomatic geometry, but that's not even really what my talk is about. My talk is actually grounded in a conversation that I followed on Twitter this year that made me really, really angry. Because it pushed me in ways that maybe I didn't want to think about, and it made me confront and think on why was it that I loved geometry? And it made me confront the fact that I didn't learn to love geometry in my own high school geometry class. I don't even know that I learned any geometry in my own high school geometry class, but at least I had arrived there already having a love of geometry, so that made me think back further to where that started. The year that I was 5.5, my brother got girders and panels for Christmas. I have no idea at all what I got, because as far as I was concerned, that was mine. Fast forward a few years, and the year I was 9, I got a spirograph, and I was really fascinated by the designs on the inside cover, not because I wanted to do those, but I could use those as a key to backtrack and make sense of and make my own patterns and make my own designs, and I carried that forward into my teenage years where I had to learn to sew because girls were not allowed to take shop, so I took home ec. So fast forward again, and I actually spent the first 15 years of my working life as an architect. And I learned a whole lot from the work that I was doing, but even more from having conversations with contractors and the way they were thinking about their work. Now, we moved coasts, and I switched careers, and I discovered that the origami that I had loved as a child that let me build things like cranes could now help me to build polyhedra, and in ways that let me learn about things like duality and chirality that I didn't even know about before I started building these things. And then I found fractals, and I couldn't just fold them, but I could draw them, and I could build them, and I could cut them, and I could take pieces of paper and crumple them up and make fractal dimensions that were somewhere between 1 and 2, and that blew my mind completely. And then I wandered onto the hyperbolic plane, and not the hyperbolic plane of the Poincaré disk model, because that never resonated with me, but a hyperbolic plane where I could actually draw and cut out a pentagon that was regular and had all 90-degree angles in it. And then I got addicted to zomes. We'll have another conversation about that, but it let me build huge things that were fourth-dimensional polytopes and opened up new worlds that I could go in, and gave me the tools to go in there and find out new things and discover new adventures. So when I actually became a secondary geometry teacher, I was determined that that was the world my students were going to experience, that they were going to get to dig in and get their hands dirty and have rich conversations about what they were doing and why they were doing it. So yeah, we did stuff out of the book, and we looked at similar triangles, but we also went outside and measured shadows and figured out how tall the admin building was. And we figured out a lot of other things as well in the process. There's a lot of research that tells us how learners take things from working memory and transform it into long-term memory. I have a lot of anecdotal data that says making a mess is a huge part of that. My kids all remember the days that they spilled something all over the floor. We used M&Ms so often in my classroom that there were a couple of kids that actually did believe, I'm not making this up, that M&Ms were called that because it stood for mathematics manipulatives. We build things because when you make something, you make sense, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't fit, and it invites you to fit something in, and when it fits in place, everything comes together, including why it worked. And if we're going to ask what if, and if we're going to give kids open questions, and if we're going to have them develop their own open questions, then we also have to give them the tools and the opportunity to answer those questions, even if it means every once in a while that, yeah, they're going to wind up drawing on the furniture. So there's a whole lot of people that seem to think right now that unless mathematics is embedded in a real world, or at least a fake world setting, that kids won't engage. I never had that problem in my classroom. When I think about transformational geometry, what I think of is that geometry has the power to transform learners into curious, creative, courageous doers, thinkers, and lovers of mathematics, because that's what it did for me.